So last year for Thanksgiving, my younger sister Kate and I decided to rent a cabin at Lake Tahoe instead of the traditional family dinner. We both needed a reset. She was in the middle of a divorce, and I was a 29-year-old graphic designer who'd started waking to phantom email pings. We picked a one-story place about half an hour from Truckee. 2 bedrooms, wood stove, water view. A local agency handled it. Wednesday afternoon, we arrived to freezing air and a skim of ice on the cove. No neighbors in sight, just trees and a narrow road. We unpacked. I got the fire going. Kate made a simple dinner. By evening, we were on the couch with wine, tossing out lazy plans. Around 10, she stepped onto the porch to smoke, then came right back in. "There's a flashlight in the woods," she said. It flicked off. I checked through the window. Nothing. I said it was probably hikers near the water. We locked up and went to bed after midnight. I woke first on Thanksgiving. In the kitchen, a white sheet of paper was half under the door. It said, in printed block letters, "You are on private land. Leave before sunset." No signature. I woke Kate. We called the owner through the agency. He sounded annoyed but sure. The land was his, paperwork current. He said locals sometimes tried to scare renters off on holidays. "Ignore it," he told us. "If anything else happens, call me." We stayed. We cooked turkey, walked the shore with coffee, kept off the ice when it creaked. At 6, it was already dim. We were finishing dinner when something hit the porch, stone on wood, a hard pop. I looked out. A fist-sized rock sat on the top step. Nobody there. Kate said, "We're not alone," and picked up her phone. I checked the side windows. Only trees, only our reflections. She called the local police. The dispatcher said a car was free, but at least 40 minutes away in the next town. "Stay inside, lock the doors, pull your curtains." We did. I slid the deadbolt, pushed a chair under the back knob, drew the curtains tight. 10 minutes later came a metal crash from behind the house. Kate jolted and dropped her fork. I opened a gap in the living room curtain. The galvanized trash can was rattling. An older man in a plaid jacket stood there, hitting the can with a stick like he wanted noise. Then he kicked it over. Garbage spilled across the ground. He was yelling, but not words I could make out. He waved his arms and pointed at the house, like he expected us to come out. Kate whispered, "Is he drunk?" I told her to stay low. He walked straight to the living room window and pressed both palms to the glass, face cupped to see in. We stepped out of sight, backs against the wall. My phone buzzed and I killed the sound. He stayed there 30 seconds. I counted. Then he turned and walked toward the road. Only then did I see the pickup. Dark, older, parked on the shoulder without lights. I hadn't heard it. He dropped the tailgate and reached in. He pulled out a long-handled tool and set it aside, then leaned in deeper. Kate whispered, "Is the cop really coming?" I said, "Yes." "We just have to sit tight," I texted the owner instead of calling. Note plus rock plus man at window plus police en route, and set the phone face down. The man paced by the truck, talking to himself, glancing at the house like he was measuring. I told Kate that if he tried a door, we'd move to the hallway and wait for the cruiser. She nodded. I thought about the note's deadline and realized whoever wrote it planned for us to leave, not call anyone. The rock and the banging felt like steps on a list. He climbed onto the bumper, leaned into the truck bed with both arms, and hauled something heavy toward him. He hopped down, turned, and I saw it clear in his hands, heavy and very sharp. Got an axe from the bed. I dialed 911 again and said it was urgent. The man was armed with an axe. The dispatcher asked if we were safe and told me she was redirecting the nearest patrol right now. "Stay on the line," she said. He came back to the house like he owned it and took the axe to the porch post. One hit, then another, splinters popping loose. Kate yelled through the door that the police were on their way. He didn't stop. The third blow sounded deeper. The fourth split the post halfway, and the porch roof creaked in a way that made my stomach flip. He froze like he was listening. Then he turned toward the door and took slow steps. We backed into the main bedroom and locked ourselves in. I pulled the dresser a few inches, not enough to jam it, just enough to feel like something. The handle rattled. Then wood boomed. One strike. Something in the core of the door cracked. Kate was crying and telling the dispatcher our names and the address while I tried to breathe quietly. Then it went dead quiet. 20 seconds of nothing. No breathing, no footsteps. The dispatcher asked me to describe any sounds. I started to say I wasn't sure, and then we both heard an engine kick over and a truck pulling away down the road. I stayed on the line until the dispatcher said the patrol was almost there. We didn't move from the floor. I pictured him circling back with the lights off, or waiting to hit another post and bring the porch down. Kate insisted we keep listening. I kept my palm on the doorknob to feel for vibration. Nothing. The engine sound faded to nothing. The dispatcher said to signal the officers when they arrived and not to unlock for anyone else. Police arrived 5 minutes later, lights washing the room. We opened the door and met 2 officers in the living room. They checked the split post, the axe gouge in the front door, the trash scattered out back. One officer photographed everything. The other took our statements while glancing toward the trees. They drove the road and the turnout by the lake and came back saying the pickup was gone. They asked for a description. We gave them what we had. Older man, maybe 60 or 70. Gray hair, plaid jacket, old red Ford, long bed. One officer looked at the other and said, "Sounds like Roy Henderson." He told us Roy lived about 5 miles out, had a reputation for being strange, but was usually just loud. "We'll find him and have a talk," he said. "If he comes back, call immediately. Do not engage." We asked if we should leave. The senior officer said we could, but he planned to run the area a few more times that night. The owner called back while they were still there. He sounded shaken and kept saying it had to be a mistake. The parcel lines were clear. He asked the officers about filing a report. They guided him through it and told him to secure the place. After they left, we checked all the locks again and moved the table against the front door out of habit. We tried to sleep in shifts. In reality, we just lay there, staring at the ceiling and waiting for engine noise, for the sound of feet in gravel, for anything. Every little pop from the stove had Kate sitting up with her hands clenched. I stayed on the couch with the porch light on. At first light, we packed and left without waiting for the rental to end. We dropped the keys at the agency lockbox and drove straight to a coffee place in town, where the owner met us. He returned the money on the spot and said he'd sue Roy for property damage. He promised to add cameras, motion lights, a new fence, and to warn future renters about a local busybody. Later that week, the police told him they found Roy and spoke to him. Roy denied everything. He said he was home all evening and that he didn't own an axe. No one could place his truck near the cabin. No video, no plate, no prints that held up. Just our statements and a broken porch. The report sat for a while, and then it was closed for lack of proof. The owner sent us photos of the new fence and cameras. We thanked him and told him we wouldn't be back. Now we only rent in neighborhoods with people around, even if it ruins the view. And I still don't know why Roy, if it was Roy, went at us like that. Maybe he truly believed the land was his. Maybe he was off his meds. Or maybe he just needed someone to push around. What I can't shake is how fast it went from a note under the door to an axe at the house, and how thin that door suddenly felt when it mattered. During the summer 3 years ago, I went on vacation with 2 friends, Chloe and Zoe, to a small beach town on the Oregon coast. I was 17, they were both 16. We rented a small cottage through Airbnb, our parents agreed. We were considered responsible enough for a short week-long trip. The cottage was in a residential area 5 minutes walk from the beach. Quiet place with a few other vacation homes. No fences, friendly neighbors, relaxed atmosphere. We planned a week at the beach, cafes, maybe visit neighboring towns. The strange thing started on the second day. We were at the beach around noon, taking selfies and chatting when Chloe got a text from an unknown number. Nice photos, especially the one where all 3 of you are on the rocks. We stared at her phone, then at each other. We really had just been on the rocks, passing the phone around, making stupid faces. No one else had our pictures. We hadn't posted anything yet. Chloe laughed first, that short laugh she does when she's covering nerves, and said maybe someone at home was messing with her. I said maybe the number used to be a friend's old number. Zoe said maybe it was the carrier app preview thing, which made no sense, but we didn't argue. College brain guesses from 3 teenagers who didn't want a problem. We looked around the beach anyway. Families with coolers, a couple older guys with fishing rods, a group of high schoolers tossing a football. Nothing that screamed creep with our numbers. We went back to the cottage around 2. It was one of those places where the front door stuck unless you lifted while turning the knob. The host had texted the tip, and I handled the lock every time. I remember making a joke about how a serial killer would get bored and leave before that door opened. That joke didn't land. Chloe kept checking her phone. No follow-up messages. We argued about what to do for dinner, settled on a cheap seafood place, and by the time we were eating fries out of a paper cup, it felt like the weird text could be filed under random beach nonsense. The next day, Zoe got a message from a different number. "The blue towel looks good on you." Zoe held her towel up like a prop lawyer in a courtroom, raised eyebrows, not smiling. "Okay," she said. "That's too specific." We scanned the beach again, slower this time, trying to not look obvious. Same scene as before. Sunburnt dads, toddlers eating sand, lifeguard blowing his whistle at no one in particular. Chloe typed, "Who is this?" to both numbers. No answer. We stayed together, walked back together. No detours, no shortcuts through alleys. We weren't reckless kids. Our parents didn't raise us like that. Back at the cottage, we talked rules. Phones on loud, door locked, curtains at night. I texted my mom a normal update and almost added a line about creepy texts, then deleted it because I knew exactly what would happen. 4 calls, trip canceled, rides arranged within the hour. We weren't unsafe. It was annoying and unsettling, but not an emergency. That's what we told ourselves. That evening, I got my first message. "You're staying in the blue cottage on Maple Lane, right?" That was our address. I didn't laugh. I put my phone on the table like it burned me. We stared at the text, like there was a second part coming that made it not terrible. Chloe said, "Okay, that's not funny." Zoe said, "We should call someone." I called the Airbnb host. She answered on the second ring, sounded tired but concerned. I explained the texts without dramatics. She said the neighborhood was safe, she'd had no issues, but to keep everything locked and to let her know if we wanted her husband to drive by later. That helped a little. We checked the windows, the sliding back door, the flimsy shed latch. I put a chair under the front knob, which made us feel like we were doing something. We did not go out after dark. The next 2 days, there were no messages. We kept the same precautions, but we also exhaled. We did a day trip to the pier in the next town, bought coffees we didn't need, and tried to make the week match the plan we'd sold to our parents. I caught myself laughing again at nothing. On the 6th day, our second to last evening, we decided to explore an old observation tower on a hill behind town. The idea came from 2 guys working at a cafe, college kids home for the summer, bored and friendly. "It's an easy climb," one of them said. "You get the whole coast from up there." We Googled it enough to confirm it existed and wasn't some prank. Wooden, tall, public lookout. No fee, just a short trail. We left around 7:30 because we wanted sunset. It took maybe 15 minutes from the trailhead. The path ran behind a row of houses, then cut into scrub, then the tower showed up. Exactly what we expected. Weathered boards. A sign warning not to climb in high wind. The town below looked small and harmless from there, like a model. I remember thinking how dumb it was that a text could ruin a week, and how I wasn't going to let it. We climbed up around 8 when the sun was already setting. The view was amazing. We were taking photos and videos. Then all 3 phones got the same message simultaneously. Great view from the top. We looked at each other in horror. If it hit all 3 at once, the sender was close. I said, "We go now." No one argued. We headed down, gripping the rail. Halfway, Zoe squeezed my wrist and pointed. In the shrubs at the base, a figure in dark clothes stood with a phone raised, recording. When they realized we saw them, they lowered the phone and didn't move. No talking. Just a shape that didn't care we'd noticed. We took the last steps together. The person didn't come closer. We turned onto the trail and ran. Not a full sprint, roots and gravel, but fast enough. I watched Chloe's backpack and waited for a grab that never came. Branches hit our arms. The tower vanished behind trees. Footsteps hit the path behind us, steady, then closer. "Don't look," Chloe said. She was right. The trail split. Right went to town. We took right. The steps kept tempo for a bit and then stopped. That stop felt worse than the sound. A porch light showed between trunks, then another. Dirt turned to pavement. We reached the first street light and stopped, bent over, phones in our hands. Cyclists passed. A couple walked a dog. A kid rolled by on a scooter. Normal life, like nothing had happened. "Police," Zoe said. We nodded. None of us suggested going back. All 3 phones buzzed again. New message. "Why run away? I just wanted to meet that killed any doubt." We went to the station and told everything. We showed the messages, read the numbers out, explained we hadn't posted photos, and still got texts about towels and our address. The desk officer listened, asked if we'd seen a face. Number. Asked if anyone had approached us earlier. Number. He said they'd try to trace the numbers, but they were probably disposable SIMs. He suggested a patrol escort back to the cottage to pack and leave early. It felt like throwing away the trip, but it made sense. He radioed a unit. A marked car arrived. One officer followed us while another looped the block. At the cottage, he checked the yard with a flashlight, the shed, the back slider. No signs of entry. He stood by while we packed. We kept it simple. Clothes, chargers, wallets, meds, food that wouldn't leak. It took 20 minutes. We locked up, thanked the officer, and he offered to trail us to the highway. We said yes. We left that night instead of morning. I texted the host that we had a safety issue and were checking out early. She replied, "Be safe," and said she'd wave the last night. The patrol tailed us to the on-ramp and turned off. The drive home was quiet. We kept checking our phones. No new messages. Zoe asked twice if the doors were locked. I kept the speed steady and watched headlights in the mirror. We didn't stop until we were past the county line. We never told our parents the full story. We said the weather turned and we came back early. A week later, the police called. The numbers were disposable, impossible to trace. No useful cameras covered the trail, and nearby houses didn't have helpful footage. The case was closed for lack of evidence. That was it. No name, no face. We were lucky nothing else happened. I still think about it. Who was it? How long had they been watching us before the first message? What would have happened if we hadn't run from the tower? I used to work as an assistant archivist at the State Records Department in Washington. The building was old, 4 stories, with long corridors and lots of storage rooms. The archive was in the basement and first floor, while upper floors were used for offices that closed at 6 p.m. I worked the evening shift from 8 p.m. to midnight, cataloging documents and moving boxes. Usually only me, the guard at the entrance, and occasionally someone from accounting staying late on the 3rd floor were in the building. The first few weeks were normal, quiet, a bit creepy with empty corridors but nothing more. I got used to the old building creaking, pipes making noise, doors occasionally slamming from drafts. But in October, strange things started happening. One evening in the basement, deep in a far storage room, I heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Not echoes or pipes, footsteps. Measured, clear, not the guard's heavy gait. I paused, set down the folder, and waited for them to pass the door. They didn't. I opened the door and looked out. The corridor was empty, just the light by the stairwell throwing a rectangle on the floor. I stood there longer than I needed to, listening, then told myself it was someone from upstairs cutting through and I'd missed them. An hour later, heading to the restroom on the first floor, I saw the door to Archive Room 1B standing ajar. We leave it locked. I checked those doors at the start of my shift. I closed it, locked it, and made a mental note that I must have slipped. The next night I heard footsteps again, this time above me, then along the first floor wing where we don't keep the lights on after 9. I asked the guard if anyone else was in. He checked the log and pointed at the sheet. Just you and me. Accounting left at 8. He shrugged. Old building, don't let it get in your head. I tried not to let it. I kept to my routine. Pull a cart, log a box ID, type the accession number, move the folder. If I heard anything, I told myself it was air in the vents, or a door not latching properly. But the next week, on Monday, I walked into the first floor sorting room, and the table I always leave centered under the light was shoved tight against the wall. On it, someone had laid out documents I didn't recognize. Different agency, different year, not from the boxes I'd been handling. I stopped at the threshold because it looked like I'd interrupted someone mid-task. Day shift was just leaving. I found my colleague by the key cabinet and asked, "Did you move anything in 1C?" She shook her head. "Haven't been in there since Friday." She looked at my face and added, "Why?" I told her about the table and the papers. She frowned and came to see. She didn't recognize the files either. We checked the room log. Only my initials since the weekend. I brought the guard in. He's an older guy who likes to do things by the book, but also hates paperwork. He didn't roll his eyes, which I appreciated. He pulled up the cameras in his office. There are only 3. Front entrance, stair landing, main archive hall. It's an old building and no one had ever gotten funding for more. We scrubbed through the weekend and that afternoon. Nothing. No one on the stairs but the accounting lady leaving. No one in the hall besides me and the janitor pushing his cart past 9. The guard said, "If somebody's here, they found every blind spot in this place." He tried to make it a joke, then said he'd keep an ear out. I refiled the documents, labeling as I went so I'd know if they moved again. I checked the windows in the sorting room, painted shut. Checked the door, good latch, then put the table back in the center. It scraped across the floor, loud. I remember the sound because later that week when I heard something similar, that exact scrape popped into my head and made my skin crawl. After that, I started locking myself in when I worked in a storage room alone. It's not ideal to be on the wrong side of a fire door with a bolt turned, but I kept the key on a wrist coil and made sure my phone had service. If I needed to leave a room, I cracked the door and listened before stepping out. I also got more careful with the box cart. I would leave it parked so the wheels faced outward. If anyone moved it while I was gone, I'd notice. Small things like that made me feel less stupid and more prepared. 2 nights later, I heard the footsteps again, from the first floor, same dark wing. I killed my basement light, stood by the stairs, and listened. They stopped. No door clicks, no talking, no elevator ding from the lobby. Just stopped. I went back to work and told myself to quit feeding it. One night in late October, I was alone in the basement, processing a backlog of transportation permits, when something heavy slid directly above me. It was the sorting room footprint, so I knew where that sound belonged. A low grinding scrape, then a thud, then another scrape. I stood there with a folder in my hand and counted 3 seconds, then 5. More scraping, like someone bracing their legs and hauling weight across the floor. Not a mouse, not pipes. In my mind, I saw that table moving again, and I realized the sound matched exactly. Another thud followed, like a box being dropped and shoved. Someone was dragging heavy boxes. I went upstairs and turned on all the corridor lights. Empty, all rooms locked. I went back to the guard who checked the building again, even went up to the 3rd floor. Nobody. He suggested I finish early if I was scared, but I needed the money, so I stayed until midnight. I worked the last 2 hours with the radio on so I wouldn't hear rustling. I kept the volume low, enough to hear the elevator but not that scrape. Every few minutes I looked at the door, then at the ceiling. Nothing happened, which almost made it worse because I felt like I'd imagined it, and also like I hadn't. The next day, getting ready for my shift, I heard from a colleague that in the neighboring wing on the 1st floor, they'd found an open window in an old warehouse that hadn't been used in years. She said it like a random update. Oh, by the way, security thinks someone jimmied a window. They decided it was a break-in from outside, but when and why was unclear, and nothing was stolen. The window faced an alley with no cameras. I stood there while she talked, and that scraping replayed in my head. Someone could have been entering through that window, hiding in empty rooms during the day, then walking the floors at night when almost nobody was there. It explained the footsteps that stopped when I listened. It explained the table shoved against the wall, the files set out like someone was hunting a name. I reported it to management, and they took it seriously. The director called facilities and security and did a walkthrough. They checked the building completely. In the old warehouse, they found signs of someone staying there. Empty bottles tucked behind a crate, a pile of cigarette butts near the window, an old blanket in the corner that smelled like smoke. Someone really had been using the place as a shelter, possibly homeless, coming in through the window. The guard looked tired when he told me. He said, "Could be nothing more than a place to sleep," and then added, "Could be someone watching for records, though. We don't know." After that, all 1st floor windows were reinforced with additional locks, bars on ground level ones near the alley. Security was increased to 2 people at night, one doing rounds, one at the desk. The night after the fix, the building felt different, not safer, just watched. No more scraping. No more doors left ajar. I worked another month and quit, unable to handle the constant tension of waiting for a sound that might not come. I still don't know who exactly was in the building those nights. Someone looking for a place to sleep, or someone with worse intentions and enough patience to learn our gaps. I think about how easy it was to move with a flashlight, how those dark wings gave cover, how the camera blind spots lined up with the rooms where I worked alone. People tell me it was probably harmless, and maybe they're right, but I keep replaying the measured steps, the table shoved against the wall, the way those files were set out. I hate the thought that a stranger watched me move through that place, learned my habits, waited for the lights to go off. If I'm honest, I'd rather think it was ghosts than a real person hiding in the dark rooms of an old archive where I stayed until midnight 4 nights a week. The idea that I was never alone during those shifts keeps me up. I worked night security at the university library for 3 years before this happened. My name's Marcus, and if you've ever done the graveyard shift, you know the drill. You get comfortable in routines because routines keep you from getting sloppy. I'd clock in at 11, check the doors, sit at the desk with the 6 monitors, and do 2 rounds unless something set me off schedule. The building looked impressive in the day and tired at night. 4 floors, narrow halls, old wooden stairs that made you feel stupid if you tried to sneak. We had 1 camera per floor and 2 outside, which is basically saying we had a lot of hope and not much coverage. The 4th floor closed to the public at 8 because of archives and rare books. That mattered later. Middle of March, a Wednesday into Thursday, around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps directly above me. Not the building settling, not pipes. Clean heel to toe. I froze, volume off on my phone, head cocked like a dog, thinking I'd imagined it. Then the steps moved again, slower, like someone trying to guess where I was. I said out loud, "Nope," because sometimes saying it out loud makes you braver. I glanced at the hallway behind the desk. No one. I stared up at the ceiling and counted to 5. The footsteps stopped. I waited another 10 seconds and stood up. My shift was supposed to be boring. That's the point of this job. But the hair on my arms was up, and that only happens to me when something's wrong. I checked the 4th floor feed. Empty corridor. It always looked like that, just the strip of lights and a locked door at the end. Nothing moved. Still, I knew what I'd heard. I took the flashlight, radio, keys, and headed up. The stairs creaked under me. Of course they did. So I took them slow. On 4, the long central corridor looked normal. I tested the study room handles. All locked. I took one of the side aisles between shelves, and that's where I saw it. 3 books on the floor, spine up, not slipped out accidental, but like someone had put them down quick. One of the old catalog drawers was pulled halfway open. That drawer was always closed. I stood listening, just the hum of the building, and backed out. My heart wasn't racing, but there was a steady push in my chest I recognized from fights I broke up on the 1st floor during exam week. I went back downstairs and pulled the footage for the past hour on 4. I scrubbed through. Around 1:03 a.m. there was movement at the far left of the frame. Not a clear person, more a shoulder and a hand, but you could tell they knew where the camera cone ended and kept to the edge. They didn't run. It was deliberate. I rewound twice to make sure I wasn't seeing a trick of the lights. Same thing. Someone avoiding me on purpose. I called my manager. Straight to voicemail. Too late. Fine. I thought about calling 911 right then, but I didn't have eyes on anyone, and I didn't want to be the idiot who calls cops for a building noise while a drunk kid is actually just asleep on a couch somewhere. I decided to sweep. First floor, check. Bathrooms empty, study tables clear, doors secure. Second floor, fine. No chairs out of place, no fresh smudges on the inside of the exit doors. On the third floor, in the reading room near the microfilm cabinets, I heard fabric brush something. Not loud, like a sleeve against a shelf. I cut my light and listened. Nothing. I said, "Security," in that flat tone I use when I don't want to sound like I'm daring anyone. No answer. I swept the beam low and slow between the stacks. Just paper, the baseboards, chair legs. I stood still for a full 20 seconds because movement makes noise and silence tells you when you're not alone. Still nothing. Then every emergency light in the building went out at once. Not a flicker, a click, and then black. Real black. The kind where you think you hear the building breathing because all your brain wants is a sound to hold. The flashlight felt slippery in my hand. I didn't wait to be a hero. I turned, found the handrail with my wrist, and moved fast down the stairs, counting steps so I didn't need it. By the time the lights popped back on, I was halfway to the lobby. I didn't slow down. I hit the crash bar, and the night air felt like permission. I called 911 from the parking lot where the exterior cameras could see me. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. University library. Night security. Possible intruder. Fourth floor restricted archives. Evidence of tampering. I'm outside. The dispatcher asked if anyone was injured. No. If the guy had killed me in there, I'd have been mad at myself for lying to make someone else feel better, so I stuck to facts. She told me to stay out, wait for officers. That was the easiest order I took all year. Cops rolled up about 15 minutes later with a K9 unit. One of the officers asked, "You see the person?" I said, "Just on the edge of the camera, and I heard them on 3. He nodded like that made sense. Dogs went in first. Even at stupid o'clock, you could feel the building finally being someone else's problem. I stood by the patrol car answering basic questions. Number of cameras, keys, who had access to 4. I told them about the catalog drawer. I told them the lights went dead for maybe 5 seconds. The younger cop wrote that down and glanced at the electrical panel door. They swept the floors, cleared them room by room, called clear the way cops do. Nothing on 1. Nothing on 2. On 3, just disturbed dust. If I'm honest, I might have done that. They took a while on 4. When they came back down, the older officer said, "We're going to check the basement." I'd been down there plenty. Maintenance level, boilers, storage. Nobody liked it. The K9 pulled hard halfway down the corridor and whined at a caged maintenance room. They cut the lock. Inside were empty food wrappers, a water bottle, a folded blanket stuffed behind a stack of paint cans, and a little pile of those tiny pencil stubs from the reference desks. There wasn't a person. Management pulled everything from the last 3 days and sat me in the tiny conference room across from HR. No nonsense, just coffee that tasted burned and a legal pad. We scrubbed hour by hour. Clear pattern. During regular hours the day before, a guy in a plain hoodie moved with a group of students heading for the stairwell at closing. He never went back through the gate. On camera, he drifted toward the stacks, then disappeared near a blind spot by the service elevator. After that, nothing until after midnight. We jumped to the late-night feeds. You could see the edges of him more than him. Elbows, a shoulder, one shoe crossing a threshold, then gone. He hugged walls, paused at corners, always just outside the arc. He never looked up at the lenses, which, to me, is as loud as staring right into them. He never ran. The movement had intent the way a janitor who's worked there 20 years has intent. It looked like home field. The police watched, then asked for building maps. One officer pointed at the basement plan and said, "Here. There's a wall camera gap." Facilities confirmed an old window well behind a filing cabinet that opened into a landscape trench. The latch had scrape marks newer than the paint. The K9 had pulled at the maintenance room door, sure, but if the guy slipped out during that 5-second blackout or just before they got there, the dogs wouldn't have hit fresh trail inside. The theory was former student or staff. Someone who'd done shifts there, maybe maintenance, maybe grad assistant, who knew the routes. They didn't catch him. That's the part that got under my skin worse than the footsteps. It wasn't the mess or the blanket or the pencil stubs. It was the subtraction. He was there and then he wasn't, and that's all. Management sent a calm email about enhanced safety measures and continued coordination with law enforcement. They doubled rounds by pulling a second guard from another building for a couple nights, swapped one exterior cam to a dome, and promised more after budget review. I nodded a lot and kept my mouth shut because anything else would have come out shaky. I typed my 2 weeks' notice the next morning and put "accepted offer with day shift" as the reason. I did get an offer from a warehouse where lights stay on and people actually stand within yelling distance. But that wasn't why. I told my manager, "It's just better hours." And he said, "I get it. Let me know if there's anything we can do to make you stay." And I said, "I think I already decided." He didn't push. He's not a bad guy. He's just in a job where he has to sound confident even when everyone can see the holes. My last week felt longer than the previous year. Every small sound turned into a checklist. Footsteps on one? Students cutting through, except it was past midnight. So I'd get up, check, find nothing, sit back down with that tight feeling under my ribs. Soft thud on two? Probably HVAC settling. So I'd walk the perimeter and hold the flashlight on vents until my eyes watered. Twice, doors reported ajar on the panel for a beat, then closed. I checked hinges, tested alarms, logged every scan like I was building a case against my own nerves. I didn't startle easy before. I do now. On the second to last night, a grad kid came in late to grab a laptop she'd left and said, "Hey, are you the guy who called the cops?" Like it was a fun fact. I made a joke about earning my taxpayer money and kept my tone casual because there's no point scaring students. She asked if it was, like, a homeless person, and I said, "We don't know." And that killed the conversation. After she left, I stood at the lobby and watched the doors breathe with the air pressure, and wondered how many times those doors had let someone slip the wrong way. My last shift was a Friday. I turned in my keys at 7:10 a.m. because the manager was late and I didn't want the handoff to be a text. He signed the form and shook my hand, and I said, "Good luck with the upgrades." On my way out, I stopped at the threshold without meaning to, just stood there a second and listened. It was nothing. Just the building being a building. That still felt like a lie. I walked to my car and didn't look back. I drive past sometimes on my way to the warehouse because the route is faster, and I don't like wasting gas. I see the new domes blinking faint in the lobby, and I think about the window well, and the light going out for 5 seconds and how quiet it was after. I tell myself I left because the schedule sucked and the pay was low. But the truth is, I left because I don't need to be a hero in a place designed to make you miss the person standing a few feet outside your picture. It happened in February last year on the highway between Springfield and Bloomington. I was driving back from a business meeting around 8 when my Civic overheated. Red light, steam, dead engine. I got to the shoulder and tried to restart. Nothing. Phone at 12%. Nearest town 30 miles. I called roadside assistance. 90 minutes, they said. pileup had everything tied up. About 50 degrees with a nasty wind sneaking through the doors. I'm Mark, 26, sales manager. I've done enough road time to know when to stop pushing a car. I put hazards on, killed the engine, wrapped up in my suit jacket, and waited. 20 minutes later, an old Toyota pulled in ahead of me. An elderly woman in a beige coat climbed out, careful on the gravel, and tapped my window. I cracked it, then rolled it down. She asked if I needed help. I told her the tow was coming. She eyed the hood, then my hands. "You'll be out here a while," she said. "Do you want to ride into Bloomington?" I thanked her and said I'd wait. She introduced herself as Doris. Headed home, lives outside Bloomington. She said she could drop me at a gas station. I mentioned the tow company told me not to leave the vehicle. She nodded like she'd heard it before. "They're backed up. Call them from my car and update the location." That was reasonable. My phone ticked to 9%. The heater blew cold. She didn't push, just stood there. I remembered a time I turned down help and ate it for hours. "I can take you straight to Bloomington," she said. I shut off hazards to save battery, grabbed my laptop bag and meeting folder, locked the Civic, and got in. Her car smelled like coffee and lavender, knitted blankets on the back seat, a chipped ceramic angel on the dash. She smiled. "I have a son about your age. I always pick people up. I hope someone would help him too." Sounded normal. We merged back onto the highway. She held a steady 60. For 10 minutes it was routine. She asked about work. I said sales, coming back from a demo that went long. She asked where I'd left the Civic. I gave a mile marker and a billboard. Her charger was old, but she had an adapter. That helped. I texted the tow my location and that I'd meet them in Bloomington. Then she asked if I was married. I said no. She paused. "My son died 2 years ago. Car accident. 28. I told her I was sorry. She looked at me. "You look like him. Tommy. Same hair, same way of talking. Even how you sit." She added, "It's a sign. I was meant to meet you today." I didn't know what to do with that, so I kept it light. She asked where I live in Bloomington. I gave an intersection instead of an address. She repeated it, then drove in silence for a bit. The highway thinned out. A few semis drifted by. My battery crept from 9 to 12 to 15. She told me about Tommy's last Thanksgiving and how he liked canned cranberry sauce nobody else touched. I said, "Sounds nice," and watched the exit signs. 5 minutes later, she took one I wasn't expecting. She saw me glance over. "Shortcut," she said. We passed a shuttered farm stand and 2 mailboxes on a leaning post. Then a narrow county road with no shoulder. She turned. No lights ahead. Open fields. A dark tree line on the horizon. My phone hit 22%, then no service. The Toyota's heater clicked. "I don't mind staying on the main highway," I said. She didn't answer for a few seconds. Her hands tightened on the wheel. "This way avoids the bridge," she said. "Construction. It's a mess at night could be true. Bridge is close." I tried to pull up a map. Spinning wheel. Turning around here would be dicey. I got specific. "The gas station at Veterans and Market works best. The tow knows it. It's well lit." A farmhouse went by on the left, all dark, then empty again. I checked the door handle out of habit and hoped she didn't notice. "You remind me of him," she said softer. "The way you try to be polite about being uncomfortable." That hit more than I liked. I adjusted my bag by my feet and kept my voice even. I said I prefer the main highway. She didn't react, just kept driving, her eyes steady on the empty road. Then she started talking softer, almost a whisper. like she was trying not to scare me. She said Tommy hadn't called for months before the crash. He got busy with work and a new girlfriend, and she never got to tell him how much she loved him. "Now I have a second chance," she said. She looked over at me a little too long for comfort and said, "You'll stay with me." It can be like before my pulse picked up. I tried the door. Locked. The click must have been central locking because my side wouldn't budge, and I didn't want to yank hard and set her off. She noticed anyway. "You don't need to be afraid," she said calmly. "I'll take care of you. I'll cook his favorite meals. We'll live in my house like a family." She said it the way people say what they're going to buy at the store, like it was settled. I realized she wasn't joking. I took out my phone. 2%, no signal. The map still spun. I breathed slow and kept my voice even. I told her I appreciated the ride, and that the tow would meet me in Bloomington, and my coworkers knew I was on the road. She kept talking about Tommy like she was convincing both of us. He liked eggs over hard. He left tools in the yard. He planned to paint the shed blue, but never did. She said I'd help with those things when we got home. She said I'd sleep in his room because it was all ready. I nodded, swallowed whatever I wanted to say, and thought through options that wouldn't get me hurt. The road narrowed again, then curved. I looked for farm lights or any sign of a gas station. Nothing. I rubbed my hands on my knees to hide the shaking, and made myself meet her eyes when she glanced over so she wouldn't think I was about to bolt. "I need to stop by home," I said, keeping my tone like I was asking for milk on the way back. "I need documents. Clothes. If I don't, they'll notice at work." She frowned, a quick crease. "Work isn't important," she said. "People forget jobs. They don't forget family." I nodded like I agreed, then kept going. I told her I had a meeting in the morning. If I didn't show, they'd call my boss, then clients. People would start looking. There would be emails, maybe police welfare checks. I said, "You don't need that. Let's go to my place first. I'll pack. I'll send a resignation email. Then we can leave and no one will know I said it flat and practical." She drove on for a long minute without replying. We rolled past another dark field. She breathed through her nose, hands at 10 and 2. She asked what street. I gave the intersection again. She didn't argue, just exhaled. Then she turned the wheel. I felt the small relief hit my shoulders. We bumped along the county road back toward the glow I knew was the highway. She said I had 30 minutes. She would come with me. I said that was fair. We merged onto the main lanes and the lights felt like a lifeline. It wasn't long before signs for Bloomington showed up. I told her I needed to grab garbage bags for my stuff. Right then, a 24-hour place off the exit. She took it and pulled into the lot, parked under a camera, and killed the engine. "I'm coming," she said. I nodded and kept pace with her to the sliding doors. A security guard stood at the entrance, leaning on a podium. I stepped toward him like I was asking for change, kept my voice low, and said, "Please call the police. This woman kidnapped me." He looked past me at Doris. "What's going on, ma'am?" he asked. She blinked fast like she had dust in her eyes and said I was her son, that I'd had a shock. We were going home. I took out my wallet, showed my driver's license with a different name and different birthday. "I'm not her son," I said. The guard's face changed. He opened the little gate and waved us inside. He locked the door and picked up the phone. Doris started to cry. Not loud. Real crying that made her words stick. She kept repeating she only wanted to help me, that I looked so much like Tommy, that I needed a warm meal. The guard told her to sit. I stood by the counter and stayed where the cameras could see me. 2 officers came in around 10 minutes later. They separated us. I told them the whole route and how she turned off, what she said, the locked doors. She told them about losing her son and how I reminded her of him. They checked my ID, asked if she had a weapon, if she touched me. She hadn't. They spoke to the manager, took statements. In the end, they let her go. Lonely elderly woman, grieving, not a direct threat. They gave her a warning and suggested a wellness follow-up. They told me to be more careful, to wait with my vehicle, to call 911 next time. A tow finally reached my Civic near dawn. I watched Doris drive away slow, hands still at 10 and 2. I never got in strangers' cars again. I heard the driver say, "Money transfers in an hour," Clark confirmed, and that's when I knew I wasn't getting home. We were on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere. 3 men I'd never seen before in the car with us, and Marcia, who I thought was just giving me a ride after my shift, was gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles were white. The guy in the passenger seat turned to look at me and said, "Hope this one's worth at least half." My stomach dropped so fast I felt lightheaded. This all started because the only taxi driver in town refused to drive out to the county at 6 a.m. I'd just finished a 12-hour night shift at the clinic, and I was desperate to get home to my daughter. Marcia, the medical receptionist who was close to retirement, had offered me a ride out of nowhere. She said she was going to visit her grandson in the next county anyway. I barely knew her. We'd only worked together 2 months, but I was exhausted and grateful. We left at dawn when the highway was almost empty. The first 20 minutes were normal. We talked about work, about kids, about nothing important. Marcia asked about my little girl's teething, and I asked about her garden, and it felt like the kind of small talk that fills dead air after a long night. Then, without warning, Marcia turned into a roadside motel lot and parked near the office. She said she forgot to pick up her nephew from a party the night before. I thought it was strange. She hadn't mentioned a nephew, but I was too tired to argue. 3 men in their 40s were waiting by the entrance, all in matching tracksuits like they'd just left a bowling league but weren't the type. They slid in without asking. 1 up front with Marcia, 2 in the back on either side of me. She introduced them as her nephew's friends and pulled back onto the road. We weren't heading toward my house anymore. I recognized the turn we should have taken and watched it pass in the rear window. No one said a word about it. The men didn't talk to us at all. They kept looking at each other and checking their phones, tapping and then locking the screens like they were timing something. The one by my right shoulder kept glancing at me, slow and measuring, and I angled my body away, pressing my bag to my lap. I told myself to wait, to not make anything worse. I had a 23-year-old's mix of pride and fear back then, but I also had a baby at home. That was the only thing that mattered. 10 minutes later, we were off the highway. Trees closed in, the air changed. Cooler, not city cooler, just shaded. And the asphalt gave way to rutted gravel. When Marcia turned down a dirt track into the woods, I asked where we were going. She said, "It's faster this way," but her voice came out thin and shaky. The guy up front, square jaw, bad shave, was the one who mentioned the money transfer. He didn't turn around when he said it. He just watched the trees. The man to my right laughed under his breath and said, "Hope this one's worth at least half." That phrasing, "this one," landed like a brick. It wasn't random. I realized Marcia wasn't just a driver. She was part of whatever this was. My heart started pounding loud enough that I was sure they could hear it. I kept my eyes down and slid my fingers along the door seam until I found the handle. I tried to lift it with my fingertips so it wouldn't click. The man on my left moved faster than I expected, clamping his hand around my wrist. It hurt, A real grip, not a warning. He hissed, "Sit still." I did, because the math was simple. 3 men, 1 road, no traffic, no houses. I glanced at Marcia. She was staring dead ahead like she could will the road to end sooner. "Jeff, I didn't sign up for this," she blurted, not looking at him. "She has a kid, a little girl." My throat closed up. Hearing her say it made everything sharpen. They knew I wasn't alone in the world. The front passenger spun halfway in his seat, eyes cold. "So Jeff, then." He told her to shut up and drive. He said she was already in it. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. We hit a pothole hard enough to bounce us. My left wrist throbbed. The guy who grabbed me loosened just enough to make a point. I forced myself to breathe evenly and count. 1, 2, 3. Something I'd learned from a paramedic during a code when panic could ruin your hands. I looked at the trees, trying to memorize turns, landmarks, anything, and got almost nothing. Just trunks and ruts and the occasional beer can crushed flat in the mud. Marcia's shoulders were rigid. "Jeff," she said again, voice lower now. "I didn't sign up for this." The right side guy snorted like he was bored. Jeff said, "You're getting paid. Keep driving." Silence crawled in. The car smelled like sweat and the motel soap the men had used that morning. I kept thinking about my daughter's morning bottle, about how my neighbor would knock if I didn't show, about the clinic coffee machine that always jammed. All of it felt a mile away and useless. Marcia exhaled in a shaky rush. I saw the vein in her temple jumping. She tightened her grip, then eased it, like she'd decided something inside herself. She said, softer this time, almost to the windshield, "My granddaughter is the same age. I can't do this." Jeff started cursing and typing into his phone. Marcia's knuckles went white on the wheel. She blinked fast, then slammed the brakes so hard our belts locked. "Get out," she said to me without turning. The men started yelling. Jeff gripped her shoulder and told her to drive. She raised her voice. I said, "Get out. Run toward the highway. There's a turn about 300 meters to the left." The guy on my right reached, but Marcia hit the hazards and cracked her door. "Let her go or I'm staying right here," she shouted. I yanked my handle, shoved the door, and jumped. I ran into the trees without looking back. Branches snapped under my shoes. I heard doors slam. I cut downhill through brush, knees high, trying not to trip. The car revved, paused, revved again. Someone yelled my name from the road. I didn't answer. When the engine faded, I kept moving until the trees thinned and I saw the highway. I slid into a ditch, scrambled up, and waved arms at the road. A farm truck braked and stopped. The driver cracked the window. "You okay?" he asked. "Please take me to the nearest police station," I said. He scanned me, scrubs, scratches, empty hands, and unlocked the door. "Get in." Seatbelt. I climbed in shaking. He watched the mirror and asked what happened. I told him I'd taken a ride from a coworker. 3 men got in at a motel. They turned onto a dirt road, and she told me to run. He nodded and said he'd had a bad feeling when he saw me waving. At the station, they sat me in a small room. I told it all from the start. They photographed the bruising on my wrist. I gave them Marcia's full name, the clinic, the motel, the tracksuits, and the lines I remembered: money transfer and half. I tried to recall the plate and got 3 numbers I wasn't sure about. I drew the dirt turn. They put out a bolo and called the county. An officer drove me home and waited while I checked on my daughter at my neighbor's place. 2 days later, a detective called. They'd found Marcia dead in her car at an abandoned sawmill about 40 miles from where I got out. Parked by a loading bay, engine off, window cracked. Official cause was suicide. He said there were no signs of struggle on her body. I asked about the men. He said they'd made composite sketches and sent them around. The car was registered under a fake name tied to a dead mailbox. No matches yet. I quit the clinic the next week and moved states. I told the manager I needed to help family. I changed my number and stopped riding with anyone I didn't know. I kept a list of plates that lingered on my street. At work, I parked under a light. If a car followed me more than 2 turns, I pulled into a busy lot and waited. I taught my daughter to look for exits and to trust the feeling before the explanation. It's been 30 years. I still see Marcia's face in the rear view when she told me to run. Sometimes I think she paid with her life for that decision. And sometimes I think she'd been a victim from the start, and that moment was the first time she pushed back. I'll never know. Every year on that day, I light a candle for her and say her name. Because whatever she was to those men, to me, she was the reason my child had a mother to come home to. During the summer of 2013, I rented a studio in a 3-story complex in Tempe, Arizona. I was 23, second year of grad school for bioengineering, and I picked the place because it was 10 minutes from campus and had interior hallways with a concierge until 8. It felt grown up, like I was doing everything right. Most people in the building were graduate students or young professionals. Across from me lived a woman and her little girl, Mia and, I later heard, Sophie. We'd pass in the elevator, say hello. Mia looked tired in a way coffee doesn't fix. Pale face, deep under eyes, and this constant guarded posture. The girl was quiet, always holding her mother's hand like a rule. September rolled in and midterms were mounting, and that's when I started noticing the late night thing. It happened 3 times before I said anything to anyone. I'd take the trash out after midnight and see Mia standing by her door in the hallway, fixed on the stairwell like she was waiting for someone to appear. No phone in her hand, no keys, just standing, bare feet sometimes. When my door clicked shut behind me, she'd glance over without really seeing me, then turn back toward the stairs. Once I said, "You okay?" She didn't answer, just shifted her weight and stared harder. I told myself not to get involved. People have their stuff. I was studying, teaching a lab, trying to keep my head above water. A few days later, I walked by and she moved quick, key in the lock, and slipped back inside like she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't. That same week, late at night, I heard shouting through the wall. Thin walls. A woman screaming, messy words about someone taking her. They took her. Give her back. Over and over, until a door slammed and the building got quiet again. I didn't sleep much. The next week, a downstairs neighbor complained to management about a garbage smell on our floor. I smelled it too, sour and sweet, like old food left under a sink. The manager came up, knocked on Mia's door, waited, knocked again. Nobody answered. She sighed and said she'd follow up. She didn't look surprised. In early October, I came back from a run around 7. The hallway still had that night chill from the AC. Mia was sitting on the carpet by the elevator, spreading photographs in a grid. Glossy drugstore prints, some with kids on playgrounds, some of birthday cakes. She was muttering, not to me, not really to anyone. I crouched, kept my voice gentle. "Hey, is everything okay?" She looked up like she hadn't heard a human voice in days. "Have you seen them?" she asked, quick and urgent. "They were here last night." "They're watching." I asked who she meant. She pointed toward the camera bubble by the elevator. "Him. The manager works with them. They want to take all the children." Her face tightened like she was bracing for a hit. I said I could call someone to help, Or we could go downstairs together and talk to the desk. The words made sense to me when they left my mouth, like steps you do when something is off. She flinched at call, swept the photos into a messy pile, and ran inside, door shutting hard. I stood there dumbly, feeling useless, then went to my apartment and called the office. "It's Ethan in 3B, I said. "I'm worried about the woman across from me." Carol, the manager, sounded tired in the way that means things have been going on for a while. She told me she knew. Social services had come a month earlier and removed Mia's daughter for unsafe conditions. "She refuses to accept it," Carol said. "She thinks the kid is still here." Hearing the name Sophie attached to an official explanation made me feel like a stranger in my own building. I asked what we were supposed to do. Carol said to call if Mia caused a disturbance, to keep doors locked, and that she'd document everything. It felt bureaucratic, but I didn't have a better plan. A week later, just after Halloween, things got worse. Mia started knocking on doors after midnight, not pounding, just this rapid little tap that wouldn't stop until you answered. If you opened up, she'd ask, "Is she here? Are you hiding Sophie?" Then she'd peer past you, quick scan of the entryway, and leave before you could say anything that would land. People started texting in the building group chat. Someone called the police. Twice the cops came up. I watched from my peephole the second time. 2 officers spoke to her low and calm in the hallway. I heard her say Sophie's name. I heard the word camera again. They were patient, I'll give them that. After a while, they walked her back toward her door. No arrest, no handcuffs. Later, Carol told me technically Mia wasn't breaking the law. She wasn't threatening anyone. She was knocking and leaving. The officers recommended she see a psychiatrist. They couldn't force her. Carol sounded careful, like she'd had this same conversation with every concerned person on our floor. I asked if the building could do anything. She said she'd started eviction proceedings, but it takes time. After the police visits, I tried to avoid running into Mia at all. I got in the habit of listening at my door, waiting for the elevator to hum or a distant door to close, then slipping out. It felt ridiculous, like I was a kid sneaking out past curfew. But it worked. I took stairs only when the hallway sounded empty. A girl from the first floor posted in the building chat that she was breaking her lease because she didn't feel safe. She said she woke up to knocking 3 nights in a row. 2 days later, she was gone, boxes out, keys in an envelope at the desk. On November 17th, I left town to see my parents in Phoenix for the weekend. It wasn't planned around Mia. It was just one of those weekends where laundry and real food and not thinking about finals sounded good. I turned off my phone for a while at their house and didn't check the building chat. By Sunday evening, I drove back and pulled into our lot, and that's when I saw the lights. Fire trucks lined the curb, police cars angled across the entrance. People from the building stood outside in hoodies and sandals, some holding their pets, all with that stunned look. I parked on the street and walked up fast, and a neighbor from my floor, Tony, waved me over. "You picked a good weekend," he said. "It was bad." His voice had that shaky laugh people do when they're past the adrenaline. Carol was near the tape with a clipboard, her neat manager face gone. She said most of this happened early Saturday morning. Mia had brought a gas canister up, poured it on her door and the carpet right there, then lit it. The fire caught fast. The alarm pulled everyone out, but Mia locked herself inside her apartment and started shouting through the door that if they didn't bring Sophie back, she'd destroy the whole building. I could hear the rest from the firefighters. Response was in under 3 minutes. They hit the hallway flames first to keep it contained. The 3rd floor corridor was black with smoke, visibility near zero. They pounded on Mia's door, talked to her, tried to keep her talking while they vented smoke. She was screaming about cameras and kids and someone stealing from her. People were evacuated. The stairwell by her place was the worst, hot and full of smoke. So they directed everyone from that end of the third floor to stay inside their units with towels at the door until crews cleared a path. I pictured my door across from hers, the thin space between. A negotiator arrived after that. I saw him later, regular clothes, firm voice. The story was he spent over an hour trying to get Mia to come out. He told her no one was taking children from the building and that her daughter was safe. He said the only way to talk about getting Sophie back was to step outside. She'd go quiet, then start again that they were liars. Then she stopped responding altogether. When she went silent, they breached the door. They found her on the floor in the kitchen, breathing shallow, unconscious from smoke. Paramedics worked on her right there in the doorway. Someone said they revived her in a minute or two. I wasn't close enough to see. They carried her out on a stretcher with an oxygen mask, loaded her into the ambulance, and left. Later, Carol told me Mia was taken to the hospital, and after that, a judge placed her in mandatory psychiatric treatment. The fire didn't take the building, but the third-floor hallway and Mia's unit were wrecked. Soot everywhere, melted light covers, sprinkler water. The fire department wouldn't let any of us back in for 2 days. Carol handed out hotel vouchers for a place next door. "Management will cover it," she said, repeating it like a line. At the hotel, people compared notes. One guy said he'd cracked his window and stuck his head out because the hall was a wall of smoke. Another woman, the one who always jogged at weird hours, said she crawled to her balcony and waited there because the stairs were right by the source. I kept thinking about my door across from Mia's. If I'd been home, that's exactly where the smoke would have been worst. Window or wait, those were the options. A week later, they let us back. My place looked the same, just a faint smell in the vents. Mia's door had a seal across it, and moving guys were there boxing everything up. No photos on the floor this time. Carol said quietly that Mia would be in the clinic at least 6 months, and Sophie was in foster care. Then she moved on to the next person with questions. I stood in the hall, reading the seal on the door, and listened to the silence of a place that had been loud in the worst way. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd been home that morning. About 5 years ago, when I was 25, I was renting the first floor of a duplex on the outskirts of town in Arizona. The house was old, built in the 60s, with high ceilings and large windows facing an empty lot. An elderly couple lived upstairs, and I barely saw them. They went to bed early and never made noise. I worked as a copywriter from home and stayed up late at my computer in the bedroom. The layout was simple: bedroom, living room, and kitchen dining in a row, with the only entrance door off the living room. The windows were old, wooden, with flimsy latches. The first few months were quiet, but in March I started noticing weird things. Some mornings the living room window would be slightly open even though I'd closed it the night before. I blamed a bad latch and bought an extra lock, but twice the window was open again. I even made a quick checklist by the switch: latch, lock, chain, so I couldn't blame my memory. Still, I'd wake to that narrow gap. Nothing else was disturbed, nothing missing, but it kept bothering me. One night around 3 a.m., I was working in headphones on an urgent project when I heard, through the music, a scraping sound from the living room. I took the headphones off and listened. The sound repeated, like something heavy shifting an inch and stopping. I walked out and turned on the living room light, but everything was in place. Window, closed. Door, locked with the chain. Figuring it was outside noise, I went back to work. About 30 minutes later, I heard a new sound, a slow, rhythmic tapping, like someone carefully tapping on glass. This time, I got up quietly, grabbed a baseball bat from the shelf, left over from college, and went into the living room without turning on the light. From the bedroom doorway, I peered at the window. The tapping came again, softer. Then I saw it. A human silhouette outside, close to the glass, one arm raised, working something between the frames, trying to flip the latch from inside. I froze, unsure what to do. Scream, turn on the light, call police? While I hesitated, the silhouette's head turned and seemed to fix on me. The person jerked back from the window and vanished. I rushed to the door, locked the deadbolt I usually didn't use, grabbed my phone and called 911. The operator asked me not to go outside and to wait for police. I went back to the bedroom with the bat and sat where I could see down the hall. Every noise became a footstep. I put the phone face down so the screen wouldn't light, and I waited. I kept the bat across my lap. 15 minutes later, I heard sirens, then a knock and police. I unchained the door and let 2 officers in. They did a fast sweep and asked me to stay inside while they checked the yard. I stood by the door with the bat until one of them nodded at it, and I set it down. Outside, I watched their flashlights skim the dirt beneath the window and the narrow strip leading to the empty lot. They came back in calm. One said, "We didn't find anyone, but you've got shoe prints under the window and fresh scratches on the frame." He showed me, clean gouges by the latch. He asked about the extra lock. I told him I'd added it recently. He said that probably kept them out tonight. We sat at the kitchen table while they took my statement. The older officer asked if anyone knew I worked nights. I said no, I kept to myself. He asked about deliveries or contractors who might have noticed the layout. "Just groceries," I said. "A plumber months back." He wrote that down and told me to get a dowel for the sash and keep the blinds closed. I asked if this kind of thing was happening a lot. He said this wasn't the first case in the neighborhood. There had been 3 break-in attempts in the last month, but they hadn't caught the burglars yet. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, and in the morning I arranged with the landlord to install bars on the first-floor windows. He wasn't happy about the price until I showed him the gouges and the officer's card. He agreed if I covered half the labor. I said yes. By noon, a handyman measured the frames and wedged dowels into the sashes so nothing could slide. The upstairs couple came down when they heard us. They looked apologetic. She said they hadn't heard anything because they sleep hard after their blood pressure pills. He nodded and said if I needed them to call, to bang on the ceiling with a broom. I gave them my number and taped theirs by my door. It felt like something practical I could control. For a week I jumped at every noise. I kept the blinds shut and the deadbolt on even during the day. I moved the bat to the hallway and kept my phone volume turned up. Work suffered because my attention was split. Every sentence felt stiff. I told 2 clients I'd be late. I stopped using headphones at night. I let music play on the laptop speaker just loud enough that I could still hear the house. Every hour I walked the rooms, tapped each latch to feel it seated, tugged the bars, checked the chain, and went back to the desk. It sounds obsessive, but after seeing the marks on the wood, I treated every click like a fire drill. 7 days after the attempt, a patrol officer called. They had arrested a man trying to pry a back window at a house on the next block. When they searched him, they found a lockpick set and gloves. During questioning, he named several addresses in the area, including my duplex, and he knew the detail about my loose latch. The officer said the man looked for houses with lights on late at night because it usually meant one person, awake and busy. He told them he had come by my place multiple times to test the windows. That night, the officer said, he almost had the latch up when he noticed movement and pulled back. If I hadn't stepped into the doorway right then, he would have gone in while I was at my desk with headphones on. I asked if he had a weapon. The officer said they didn't find one, but that didn't make it safe. People use whatever is in reach. He told me to keep the report number, expect a call from a detective, and keep the order for bars moving. That evening, the handyman returned with the metal and installed bars over the living room and kitchen windows. He drilled into the frames and made me test each latch. It wasn't pretty, but after he left, I locked the grates, set the bat back by the bed, and finally slept a little. I didn't renew the lease and moved out 2 months later. I chose a second-floor place with newer windows and a peephole I use. Now I check the windows before bed and again in the morning, and I never wear headphones at night when I'm home alone. I don't care if it slows my work. Sometimes I think about how many times that man came, and whether he stood at my window on nights I blame the wind or the upstairs TV. The part that gets me is simple. If I hadn't taken off my headphones to stretch, I wouldn't have heard anything until it was too late. Back in 2009, when I was 30 and fresh off a bad divorce, I took a job as a night security guard at a warehouse in an industrial area outside Detroit. I needed money fast, and this 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift was the only option. The pay was decent, but the area had a rough reputation. First few months were quiet, just watching cameras, doing rounds every 2 hours, reading between checks. My guard booth sat right at the entrance gate with a clear view of the empty street and a 24-hour car wash across from us. That car wash became a problem once the weather warmed up. I kept the gate locked unless a truck was scheduled, logged license plates, and did what the company trained me to do: observe, document, avoid confrontation. My divorce lawyer kept emailing about paperwork, and I was trying to be the guy who shows up and doesn't make waves. The only human contact most nights was the clerk at the all-night gas station 2 blocks down, who'd wave when he took a smoke break. Once in a while, a stray dog would nose at the chain link and set off the motion sensor, and I'd do a lap and pretend that counted as cardio. But I started noticing small things that felt off: cars slowing past our gate, the car wash lights flicking on at weird hours, a sedan idling at the corner with no one getting out. When I told my supervisor, he said to write it up and not to engage. Every night, Friday through Sunday, the same group of 6 or 7 guys would show up in expensive cars. They parked under the car wash canopy, smoked, blasted music from portable speakers, and took turns gunning engines down the empty street. They weren't washing anything. I called the cops twice, got put on hold once, and the other time a patrol car rolled through after everyone had already vanished. The night a cruiser actually turned the corner with lights on, the guys split fast, waited out of sight, then cruised back like nothing happened. After that, they started looking toward my booth in a way I didn't like, not yelling, just that held stare. I kept the shades half down and stuck to policy: observe, document, avoid. A couple times I heard a bottle break by the curb and waited it out before I did my rounds. Getting into it with guys who had more friends and better cars than me wasn't smart, and I needed the paycheck to keep the apartment. The car wash owner never showed at night, and the property manager said the lot wasn't ours, so it wasn't our fight. Still, the vibe got worse. Once, when I stepped out to unlock the gate for a delivery, one of them yelled, asking if I worked alone and if I liked my job. I told him I was on camera and so was he, and he laughed and asked if the camera could fight. One Saturday around 2 a.m., I was doing my regular patrol of the warehouse grounds when I heard shouting from the car wash. It wasn't music shouting. It was the kind that makes people put hands up like they're calming a dog. By the time I got back to the booth, I saw a white van pulled up nose to nose with the usual line of cars. 3 men in dark clothes were out, doors open, arguing with the group. It wasn't playful. Two of the guys from the cars had their palms up, talking fast, another pacing, and everyone kept looking around like they were waiting for who else might show. I picked up my phone and stepped behind the door so the glass would cover me while I dialed. Didn't get that far. One of the men from the van lifted his shirt with one hand, pulled a gun with the other, and fired twice up into the air. The shots cracked across the lot. My mouth went dry and the keypad blurred under my thumb. Everyone froze. He dropped his aim to chest level. Then he fired toward the group. I saw the muzzle flash in the dark. One of the guys dropped to the ground. The others took off in different directions, behind the vacuums, over the curb, anywhere not in the line of fire. The shooter and his people jumped back in the van and ripped away with screeching tires. From the first shout to the last shot, the whole thing took maybe 10 seconds. When the engine noise faded, the lot went weirdly quiet. A young guy was left on the car wash pavement, on his back, arms crooked like he'd tried to get up and didn't finish. I couldn't see his face from that distance, but I could tell he wasn't moving. I dialed 911 with my thumb shaking and said the address twice. The operator kept me on the line and asked if the shooter was still on scene. I said no. White van, older model, no rear windows, partial plate that I read off the gate camera log. She told me not to approach the victim. I didn't. Two of the other guys peeked around a bay and yelled things at me. If I saw anything, if I was calling it in, then they ran. I kept eyes on the street like that mattered. First car arrived fast, lights and no siren, then another. An officer waved me back when I stepped out, and a different one ran to the kid with a trauma kit, but slowed halfway like he already knew. I unlocked the gate for the EMTs and pointed at the angle where my camera might have caught the van. A paramedic cut the shirt and pressed pads to the chest wound. Someone started chest compressions, heavy and steady, and then they stopped. The EMT stood, gave a look to the officer, and I knew right there he wasn't coming back. I watched the radio cords bounce on their vests and realized my mouth was still open. They took my first statement by the booth under the fluorescent that always flickered. I described the shooter, height, jacket, the way he kept his arms straight, the 2 warning shots. I gave the partial plate again and mentioned the dent on the passenger side of the van's rear door because it stuck in my head. I pulled the DVR for them and showed how Cam 3 barely caught the far edge of the wash, just enough for headlights and the tail of the van turning out. They took the hard drive. One detective asked if the guys had ever bothered me. I said they mostly ignored me, except a couple comments. Nothing I could put on paper that would help. He nodded like he'd heard that 100 times. They kept me until almost sunrise for a second pass on the statement. I stuck to the timeline and told them I hadn't left the property line. A sergeant asked if I'd recognized any faces. I said no, not with any certainty. He didn't push. They taped off the lot, chalk marks and little numbered tents by the casings. A tow truck came for the kid's car even though it wasn't parked illegal. Standard, they said. When the coroner's van pulled out, the detective came by again and told me, off the record, the victim was 19. I nodded and felt useless. The sound of those 2 warning shots kept replaying like a ringtone I couldn't silence. The investigation dragged on for months and nothing moved. Cops cruised the block more for a while, talked to a few businesses in daylight, then it went back to normal nights. One detective called me twice to clarify sequence, which felt like we were just rewording the same 10 seconds. He said, quiet. He thought it was drug-related, that the kid and his friends were working for the wrong side of someone's operation. Nothing official ever came of it. The car wash stayed empty after that night. Same lights, same canopy, no crowd. A couple times I saw cars slow down like habit and then drive on. 4 months later, I quit and took a day dispatcher job at a logistics company 2 towns over. I told my supervisor I couldn't do nights anymore, and he didn't argue. I turned in my badge and got in my car and realized I'd been clenching the steering wheel for months. On my first week of day shifts, I drove past the lot out of habit, and there was nothing there. Just an empty bay and a trash bag stuck on the fence. I didn't stop. I didn't want to talk to anyone who might tell me a name or a cousin or a rumor. I still run that night over in my head. And yeah, I ask myself if I should have done more before it ever happened. Called in the crowd every weekend, pushed the property manager, written a memo that made someone act. But the truth is, I knew how that strip worked. People keep their heads down. You report what's yours, and you don't adopt new problems. I did what my job said. Observe, document, avoid. And a kid still died 30 yards from my booth. Everyone in the area knew it was unsolved and nobody was surprised. I pass that car wash sometimes and my hands tense on the wheel. I see the flash, the body, and the van turning out. And I understand why so many people decide not to see things. Because once you do, you're in it whether you want to be or not. This happened early April when I was driving from Phoenix to Tucson in the afternoon. Around 3 p.m., hot as hell, highway mostly empty. I had the AC on low because mine cuts out if I push it, and I was kind of zoning out to a podcast. After about an hour of desert and sun glare, I saw her up ahead on the shoulder with her thumb out. I almost passed by. I don't pick up strangers. But it was stupid hot, and there was no shade. And leaving a woman baking out there felt wrong. I pulled onto the shoulder, rolled down the passenger window and said, "You okay?" She jogged up, about 30, light jeans, white tank, small backpack, thanked me and said her car died maybe 15 miles back. Phone was dead. She just needed the next town to charge and call a tow. I said that was fine, and she climbed in. "I'm Jenna," I said, out of habit. She said thanks again in this tired voice and hugged the backpack to her knees. She smelled like sunscreen and sweat, normal for the day. No weird vibe. She kept saying, "I'm so sorry, I should have checked my battery," like she'd practiced apologizing to people. I said not to worry. I asked if she had water and she showed me a hot, half-empty bottle. I handed over mine. She drank like she didn't want to be rude about it. We merged back onto the highway, and I felt that little prickle between the shoulders you get when you've done something against your own rule. Nothing dramatic, just being alert. She was quiet, watching the road. She said her name was Kate. I told her we'd hit a town in about 40 minutes. She nodded and laughed once when a dust devil crossed the median. "I hate this stretch," she said. "Car always feels like it might come apart." I told her I do it a lot for work, and it's fine if you keep your head. We settled into silence. Every few minutes she checked the dead phone out of habit, then shook her head like she caught herself. I asked what kind of car she had. "Old Civic," she said. "My uncle says it runs forever, so." Her voice trailed off. She leaned the seat back a notch and closed her eyes. I watched her hands, clean but with that road dust film on the knuckles. All normal. I kept thinking about the heat, how stupid it would be to leave someone out there. I told myself I'd done the right thing. That helped, a little. We drove and she introduced herself as Kate. Small talk about the heat, her bad luck with the car. She seemed normal. A little tired, but nothing suspicious. She asked how far to the next town, and I said about 40 minutes. Kate nodded and leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes. I kept driving, occasionally glancing at her. Maybe 20 minutes later, we came up on a small gas station, only one on this stretch of highway. I decided to stop and get some water. Kate said she'd get out too, use the bathroom. We both got out. I went into the little convenience store. Kate headed toward the bathrooms on the side of the building. Inside, it was that old humming cooler sound and a single guy behind the counter. I grabbed 2 waters and chips. I remember thinking I should top off the tank, then I didn't because the pump looked sketchy and my card reader is picky. The cashier stared at the TV over the lottery display like I wasn't there. I paid cash. It was quick. I considered buying a portable charger for Kate, but they didn't have any. I figured we'd get to town, no problem. I could see my car through the window and the heat shimmer under it. Nothing felt off. Back outside, I walked straight to the car, set the bottles on the hood, and looked at the passenger seat. Empty. I waited, thinking she was washing her hands or whatever. I opened the chips and didn't eat any because that felt rude if she came back. 2 minutes, maybe 3. I went to the bathrooms on the side. The first door was propped, light off, nobody in there. Second one, same. I checked my watch out of reflex and didn't register the time. I walked around the building because sometimes people step into the shade. Nothing. Just a busted ice machine and a faded soda ad. The property was small, a square of gravel and a strip of scrub behind it. No cars pulling in, no engine noise on the highway, just that low insect buzz you always hear out there. I did a second loop, a little faster. "Kate," I said once, and my voice sounded dumb. I went back inside and asked the cashier if he'd seen a woman in a white tank top. He barely looked at me. "Nope," he said. I said she came in with me in a white tank and light jeans. He blinked. Slow. "Ain't seen nobody but you," he said, tapping a pen on the counter. I told him she went to the bathrooms. He shrugged like he was being careful not to care. I stepped outside again and looked at the highway, expecting to see a car the color of nothing pulling off, door closing, something that made sense. Nothing. I thought, okay, maybe she got a ride. But the parking lot had only my car and the cashier's old pickup truck. I called the police and described what happened. The dispatcher kept me on the line, asked me to spell her name, which I couldn't because I only had Kate. She told me to stay with the car, keep eyes open, don't wander off into the brush. It took a while. The sun felt heavier. About 40 minutes later, a county sheriff truck rolled in, dust sliding off the fenders. He introduced himself, calm voice, not surprised. I repeated everything from the start. Phoenix to Tucson, saw her thumbing white tank, light jeans, small backpack, said her car was dead 15 miles back, phone dead. I stopped here to grab water, she said bathroom. Gone. He wrote it all in a small notebook and asked me to say it again slower, then asked for times. I said 20 minutes from pickup to station, 5 minutes inside tops. He asked if I saw anyone leave the lot. I didn't. He walked the property with me. We checked both bathrooms, the dumpsters, the weeds behind the ice chest, the narrow strip where the fence leaned. Nothing. He talked to the cashier for a couple minutes and came back shaking his head. He asked if Kate had said a last name, a job, a place she was going. Nope. He asked about the backpack, color, brands, any sticker. I said plain black, no logo that stuck out. He had the cashier pull the video feed. One camera, fixed on the pumps, low resolution. He scrubbed back and we watched me pull up, passenger side out of view. You could see me walk in, then out, hang around by my car. No other vehicles came or left. No human shape crossing the frame. The sheriff didn't make a big show of it. He just exhaled through his nose and said, "It happens fast sometimes." He took my license and plate, copied them, had me sign a statement. He said if someone reported a Kate missing, this would get flagged. "You're free to go, Jenna," he said. "If she calls you or you find anything of hers in the car, dial this number." He gave me a card. I checked my seats again. Glove box, floor, nothing. I got back on the highway and drove to Tucson with the water bottles sweating in the cup holders and my head trying to line up facts that wouldn't line up. Few days later, I checked the news and found a short article. A woman named Kate Morrison was reported missing, last seen in Phoenix 3 days before I picked her up. The description matched perfectly. Police were asking witnesses to come forward with information. I called immediately and left my contact details, but never heard anything back about it. To this day, I have no idea what happened at that gas station or where Kate Morrison went. Did someone track her and take her that fast without me or the cashier noticing? But how? The whole thing took maybe 5 minutes between when I went inside and came back out. I checked my spam folder, voicemail, everything, for weeks. Nothing. I called the sheriff's number on the card once. Then again, got the same polite line about open investigations. I Googled her name too much and closed the tabs because it made me feel useless and weird. For a while. Sometimes I drive past that gas station, and every time I remember that weird afternoon, wondering if Kate is still out there somewhere, or if something terrible happened to her in those few minutes she was out of my sight. Way back in September last year, I work as an HR manager for a logistics company, office in an industrial zone in Indianapolis. I'm 42, not the type to spook easy, and I usually leave at 6. That Thursday went long. Suppliers dragged a quick sync into a 3-hour mess, and by the time I shut my laptop, it was a little after 9. Our security guy clocks out at 8. Lights were off in the hallway, that humming noise quiet buildings get. In the lot, it was just my Subaru and the same sleeper rig that always parks overnight. I remember thinking I should have packed leftovers, so I didn't have to scavenge cereal when I got home. The drive out is 20 minutes of highway. At the third light, I clocked a gray van 2 cars back, no windows on the back doors, boxy, worn. Looked like any contractor's van. I changed lanes. It changed lanes. Not a big deal. Indy's full of trades. I exited toward my neighborhood, signaled early, took the ramp. The van took it too. That got my attention, but I told myself I was being dramatic. 2 turns later, I slowed to let it pass because I hate the feeling of a car sitting on my bumper. I actually braked a little longer at a 4-way. It didn't pass. It hung back at that same loose distance, like 60 feet, not committing. Street was dead. Strip mall dark, nail place dark, even the taco place dark. I passed my street. The van passed my street too. I told myself, okay, test it. I went straight, then another block, then right. The van kept the same lazy follow, never closing, never falling away. I cracked my window to hear if it was a loud engine. Nothing. My hands were damp on the wheel, which felt stupid, but the feeling wasn't going away. I cut through the residential off Maple where my co-worker Sarah rents, thinking the driver would keep going if they weren't actually tracking me. It turned. I said out loud, "Nope." I hit call on Sarah. Straight to voicemail. It was late. She's got a toddler who sleeps light. I didn't leave a message. I took a left toward the little restaurant row, bars, a sushi place, the pizza joint with the neon sign that never works. The van stayed back, steady, like whoever was in there was patient. I remembered some article, "Don't lead someone to your home, get to a police station if you can." I knew where the nearest one was on the main, 3 miles. I did a quick U-turn at a light, tires chirped, and I went for it. The van did the same, but I squeezed a yellow at Arden and it caught a red. In the mirror, I saw its grille pause and then disappear behind cross traffic. I didn't relax. I dialed 911 and explained it fast. Gray van, no windows, followed me through multiple turns. I was heading to the station on Meridian. The dispatcher kept her voice even, asked my plate, stayed on the line, told me officers would be notified. I said I didn't want to stop anywhere except their front door. She said, "Keep driving normally. Don't engage." I pulled straight into the station's entrance 5 minutes later, parked crooked in the first open spot, and didn't care. The van wasn't in sight. I sat there a beat, breathing, then grabbed my bag and went inside. The duty officer was behind glass, bald, mid-50s maybe. I told him, probably too fast, and he looked at the clock like he was mapping units in his head. "What kind of van?" he asked. "Gray Dodge, I think." Worn, no front plate. Back doors had no windows. Driver was a man. Couldn't get a good look. Tinted. He nodded like that matched something he'd seen before, or maybe that's just how they nod. He asked if I'd gotten any numbers. I told him no, the back plate I didn't catch. He asked route and time. I gave him streets, told him where it lost me when I ran the yellow. He called it in, short and clipped, then told me they'd have patrols sweep the area for a matching vehicle. "You can wait here or we can get you home with an escort," he said. Personal preference. "Escort," I said. I didn't pretend to be tough. He said okay, asked where I lived. I gave the cross streets, not the exact number until we were in the car. He put me in the back of a cruiser, my Subaru would follow, and another officer slid behind my wheel to drive it. The arrangement felt embarrassing but also very safe. The ride back was quiet except for the radio. We didn't see the van. At the house, the officer walked me up, asked if anyone else was inside. Number. He did a quick sweep with me, front to back, checked the yard gate, peeked at the basement door, the sliders. Everything was locked like I'd left it that morning. He said no fresh footprints in the dew on the side path, which I wouldn't have thought to look for. He stood at the door a second, made sure I was really listening. I was. He told me to keep doors and windows locked, keep outside lights on for a few nights, vary my routine if I could, and not open the door to anybody I didn't know. He said sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes it's someone testing. That word stuck with me. Testing. He gave me a card with a case number and said if I saw that van again to call right away, even if it felt silly. I told him it didn't feel silly at all. He repeated the last part like a checklist. Lock up, not open to strangers. I thanked him and closed the door after he stepped off the porch. I locked the deadbolt, the knob, set the alarm, then walked the house once more. Windows latched, back slider secured, garage light on. I called my brother and told him what happened. The plate I didn't get, the way the van held that same distance. He went quiet in that way he does when he's angry but trying not to make it worse. He offered to come crash on my couch. I said no, the police were aware and they'd already checked the house. He told me to call if anything looked off. I promised I would. I double-checked the locks and went to bed with my phone on the dresser. I slept, but not deep. A truck braked on the main road around 3, and I sat up before I knew why. I checked the window, saw nothing, and wrote the time down anyway like the officer said. Next morning, an officer called to say they hadn't found the van but would have patrols circle the area. He asked if I'd noticed any other cars lingering. I hadn't. He told me to keep notes and call if anything escalated. At work, I told my boss and the admin team because it affected late meetings. People were sympathetic, then practical. Tom said 2 weeks ago he'd read that a woman at a supermarket fought off 2 guys trying to drag her into a gray van. He swore the description matched. I found the article on his phone and saw just enough to feel sick. I called the non-emergency line and asked them to add it to my report. A detective rang back an hour later. I relayed what Tom told me, the store, the rough date, 2 men, gray van, and my route that night. He recorded it, thanked me, and said the investigation was active but no suspects yet. He asked about cameras at home or the office lot. Home, number. Work had one by the entrance, but my car was off to the side. I emailed facilities to pull what they could from 9 to 10 and got a reply later that the angle missed me. That night, I left the porch light on and slept with my keys beside the bed. I woke once, looked through the blinds, and went back to sleep. The next week, I bought pepper spray and a small keychain alarm. I changed my route home, new exit, new streets, no autopilot. If we stayed late, I left with colleagues and parked under lights near cameras. Jess and Tom started walking me to my car and waiting until I was on the ramp. I texted my brother when I got home for the first week, then every few days. I also stopped posting anything that showed my routine. Looking back, I'd been handing out a map without thinking. 8 months went by without seeing that van. The detective checked in twice, then not for a while. When I called, he said they never found the owner and the description matched too many vehicles. He said it could have been coincidence, someone making similar turns, someone distracted. I told him I understood, but the driving pattern felt too purposeful. He didn't push back and told me to keep doing what I was doing and to call fast if anything popped. Some nights I wake to an engine and stand by the window until the car passes. I don't know what would have happened if I'd driven straight home instead of to the station. I think about the woman at the supermarket and wonder if she's okay now. Two years ago, our family bought a house in a new residential area on the edge of a wasteland. Former industrial zone the city planned to develop but never started. I was 16, living with my mom and younger brother Ethan, who was 12. The model house smelled like paint, the streets were half paved, and there were more porta potties than mailboxes. It felt temporary, like a stage set that hadn't figured out its actors yet. The sales guy called the empty land Future Parks. Locals called it the Wasteland. It was a wide, ugly mix of weeds and concrete slabs, with busted brick walls from old warehouses that never fully came down. Mom said we were lucky. Cheap mortgage, new build, decent schools if you didn't mind a bus ride. The area was quiet. Too quiet. At night you could hear wind buzzing through rebar. There were barely any neighbors, just one elderly couple 3 houses down, the Burns, who had a neat little yard and a motion light that clicked on every time a stray cat cut through. A week after we moved in, Mrs. Burns walked over with a pie balanced in both hands and this stiff smile. She talked like someone who was trying to sound casual and not scare us. She said while our house was being built, a man regularly came to the construction site and stood at the edge of the wasteland watching the workers. Mom thanked her, set the pie on the counter, and asked for details. Mrs. Burns didn't have many. Middle-aged, ordinary clothes, not tall, not short. He'd just stand there, sometimes early morning, sometimes late. She said the crew yelled at him twice and he left, but he kept coming back, always to the same crumbled corner where the weeds were taller. Mr. Burns asked him what he was doing, and the man said, "Just watching how the neighborhood changes." That line stuck to me like burrs. It sounded rehearsed, like something you say when you've already planned to say it. We weren't strangers to weird people. Our old apartment complex was loud on weekends. But this felt different. There weren't crowds to hide in here. It was open. Empty streets make you feel like you're the only story anyone could be watching. Mom thanked Mrs. Burns again and told her she'd keep an eye out. After she left, Mom laughed it off a little for Ethan's sake. "Probably a bored guy from that camp by the highway," she said. I nodded, because arguing in front of Ethan always made him anxious. The first months were boring in the way new places are. Boxes, Minor fights over where the router should go, school bus routes. The Burns waved a lot. Then they started having problems. Mr. Burns mentioned it to Mom at the mailbox. Things were disappearing from their unlocked garage. Power tools, an old bike, some chairs. Small stuff. The kind of thing you only notice when you reach for it. They assumed it was teenagers or one of the homeless folks who sheltered in the old warehouse shells when the wind kicked up. Mom told him to call the non-emergency line, but he said he'd handle it. He was the type who says he'll handle it. They installed cameras, cheap ones that sent clips to his phone. A week later, they caught someone approaching the garage at night. The video was garbage. Grainy, a hoodie shape sliding past the edge of the frame. You couldn't tell if it was the same man Mrs. Burns had described, or just some neighbor kid trying not to be recognized. Mr. Burns reinforced the locks, put a deadbolt on the side door, and started locking the garage every evening after dinner. The thefts stopped. 3 days later, all the stolen stuff came back. They found it stacked neatly on their front porch at sunrise. No note. Just a tidy pile that looked like a photo from a hardware store ad. Saw, drill, bicycle, folded chairs, like someone wanted credit for organization. Mr. Burns carried each thing back inside and didn't say much. Mrs. Burns told my mom with this weird, half-angry, half-scared look that made me feel like I'd swallowed ice. Returned property meant someone cared about being seen, or they wanted to show control. I remember Mom locking the front door while Mrs. Burns was still talking. After that, Mom got stricter. Doors locked even if we were inside. Windows latched, even in daylight. She set reminders on her phone for evening checks. She told me, "If a package shows up, leave it till I'm home." It wasn't paranoia. It was a system. She even showed Ethan how to text our group thread with one word: home. Every time he got in from school. He rolled his eyes, but he did it. It made sense. You don't play brave in a place with too many places to watch from. October came fast. Shorter days. Earlier dark. One Saturday afternoon, I took our dog Charlie into the backyard because he was pacing the door. The yard backed right up to the chain-link fence, and beyond that was the wasteland, flat and brown with those broken warehouse teeth in the distance. It had rained the night before, so the ground out there looked darker in spots, like footprints could hold shape longer. I didn't go out. I didn't even open the gate. I stood by the patio while Charlie sniffed the fence line. He stiffened first, ears up, the low growl he only used for weird noises, foxes, once a drone. Then he went off, barking hard toward the broken walls. I told him quiet, but he wouldn't. I followed his line of sight and saw a person, still as a post, standing between the old warehouse buildings about 30 yards from the fence. He wasn't moving, just watching. Average height, dark jacket with a hood, couldn't see the face. I quickly went back inside and told my mom. We went out together, but nobody was there anymore. She called out, "Hello?" Once, not loud, just enough to feel normal if it was a neighbor. No answer. Charlie kept pacing the fence, hackles up, then whining like he was frustrated the shape was gone. Mom called the police. A patrol car came an hour later, searched the wasteland, found nobody. The officer took our names, asked if we wanted a trespass notice ready if they caught someone, and told Mom to keep lights on and record anything we could. "It's probably a camped-out transient," he said. He gave a card and told us to lock the gate with a chain. We did both. I wanted to believe that was the end. The last encounter happened in December. It was the kind of cold where the window glass feels wet. I couldn't sleep around 1 in the morning and was sitting in the kitchen with hot chocolate scrolling, when something thumped in the yard, like a lid clattering. I turned off my phone and listened. Another small scrape. I didn't flip on the porch light because I didn't want to telegraph that someone was awake. I eased the curtain with 2 fingers and looked out. Our trash can was angled open. A figure was there, shoulders bent, going through the garbage. He took something out, held it close to his face, and examined it by his phone flashlight, like he was reading. It wasn't frantic. It was methodical. I froze, not knowing what to do. Then he lifted his head and looked directly at the kitchen window, at me. Even in the dark, I saw his face in the phone light, ordinary. Nothing special, but the look was empty and cold. We stared at each other for about 5 seconds. I counted without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. My stomach felt heavy. 4, 5. Then he slowly put what he was holding back in the can, closed the lid with care, turned off the flashlight, and walked away into the darkness toward the wasteland. Not fast, not running, just turned and walked. I didn't chase. I didn't shout. I put the mug down because my hands weren't steady. I went straight to my mom's room and said, "He's here." She was up before I finished, grabbed her phone, and called. She told the dispatcher he was on foot, heading toward the broken walls, no vehicle. They told us to stay inside, keep the doors locked, don't confront. Mom woke Ethan just enough to move him into her room and shut the door. Charlie paced and whined at the back door again, then lay down because we told him to. We kept the lights off and waited for the siren. This time they took it more seriously. 2 officers came, plus a second car that stayed near the entrance to the old lot. One officer knocked and asked if we were okay, then had us point where we saw him go. They climbed the fence at the service cut through the construction crews used and started sweeping with flashlights in a slow grid. I watched from the upstairs hall window because I wanted to know where those beams went. They moved careful, checking under the half-collapsed roof lines and those low concrete pits that hold rain. About 20 minutes later, they waved us out. We stayed on our side of the fence. They said they found traces of a temporary camp in one of the abandoned buildings. A sleeping bag stuffed under a pallet, empty food cans, plastic bottles, and the remains of a fire with blackened rocks. One officer held up a little pile of receipts in a bag. "Corner store nearby," he said. "Dates are recent." He told Mom they couldn't prove it was the same guy yet, but it was likely. He wrote a case number on the back of the card and told us to add motion lights to the side yard and keep trash inside the garage until morning pickup. Mom did all of it. She also moved a small bin into the pantry for anything with our names on it. Labels, mail shreds, prescription stickers, so we could bag that separately. She told Ethan, "No taking the dog out alone." Not for a while. He didn't argue. The Burns came over the next day and said their cameras caught nothing except the patrol cars, but Mr. Burns added 2 more lights anyway. We all started texting if we saw anything odd. Mrs. Burns stopped taking her morning walks by the fence line. Nobody said stalker, but everyone did the math. The police increased patrols. We saw the cruiser cut through twice a night for a couple weeks, then less. But there was still a pattern. No one knocked our trash over again. No footsteps by the fence. No silhouette between the walls. School. Winter break. Then spring. The wasteland stayed empty except for wind and plastic bags. We haven't seen him since. 8 months have passed. Sometimes I look at the wasteland from my window and wonder if he left completely or just became more careful. It happened back when I was 20, in my second year of college in Michigan. I was working as a food delivery courier to make extra money, and I was pretty shy, never had any serious relationships. I spent most of my time studying. One day this guy Colin messaged me on a dating app. His profile showed a guy in his 30s, athletic build, with blurry photos taken outdoors. He was pushy from the start, wanted to meet up the next day, go to a bar to hear live music. I wasn't sure because I had zero experience with this kind of thing, but Colin kept insisting, promising it would be casual. I finally agreed, thinking it was time to step out of my comfort zone. We agreed to meet at a shopping mall entrance at 7 p.m. Colin said we'd drive from there in his car. All day I told myself to keep it simple. Public place, my exit if it felt off. I didn't tell friends because I didn't want the comments. I even said it out loud in my apartment like practice. If it's weird, I leave. It helped a little. I wore a clean hoodie and decent shoes and tried not to look like I'd sprinted over there. At 6:55 I was outside the mall, pretending to scroll while I watched people push strollers and carry bags. I kept thinking I should have driven my own car and just met him there. But I was trying not to be the paranoid kid who never tries anything new. When I showed up, Colin was already waiting, but he looked different from his photos. Older, with an unshaven face and nervous eyes. I decided not to show my disappointment and said hello. Colin immediately suggested we get in his pickup truck parked at the far end of the lot. On the way, he explained that the bar was outside the city, about 40 minutes away. I got suspicious because his profile mentioned a place downtown. Colin assured me the atmosphere was better there and less crowded. I didn't want to seem uptight, so I kept quiet. He walked fast, talked faster, like we were late for a thing I didn't know about. I noticed the truck had out-of-county plates. That detail stuck with me for no real reason, just filed away. As we pulled onto the highway, Colin started asking strange questions. Where exactly did I live? Who was I renting with? Did I have roommates? I answered vaguely, saying I lived with 3 guys from the lacrosse team, though I actually lived alone in a studio. Colin kept nodding and checking his rearview mirror constantly, like he was making sure nobody was following us. I asked what kind of music the bar had, and he said, "Local acts. You'll like it," then went back to questions. What building was my classes in? Was my landlord strict? Did I cook? I gave soft answers and turned my phone brightness down. He noticed me doing that and smiled like he knew a joke I didn't. About 20 minutes in, he drifted a little. He laughed, said he was hungry. He reached over to adjust the vent on my side and let his hand rest there a second. I edged closer to the door. He noticed and shook his head like I was being dramatic. I told him I had to be back early. He said, "We'll be quick," and tapped the wheel like a metronome. When he wasn't talking, he was breathing through his mouth in short bursts, like he'd jogged upstairs. After half an hour, Colin took an exit onto a country road. He said it was a shortcut. There were only fields and occasional farms around. It was getting dark. I felt anxious and asked him to turn on phone navigation so I could see the route. Colin brushed it off, saying he knew the way by heart. I opened maps and watched the dots slide, then flicker. He laughed and said, "Service is trash out here." Then he suggested I grab a beer from the cooler in the back seat. I refused, saying I had to get up early tomorrow. But Colin kept pushing, saying 1 can wouldn't hurt. I said I don't drink in cars. He laughed like that was cute. He cracked one for himself and took a sip with one hand on the wheel. I watched the speed drop as he talked. I asked him to send me the address so I could put it in my phone. He said the bar was cash only and off the maps, hole-in-the-wall type. I said that didn't make sense. He shrugged and took another right onto a road with no lines. I texted a friend's number I hadn't used in months with a quick message. With Colin, silver pickup, last sign said Porter. No idea if it sent. He glanced at my phone and grinned. "You keeping your boys updated?" I said, "Yeah." He tapped the mirror again. "Attaboy." Then he suggested I check the cooler again, said there was soda too. I said I was fine. When I refused a second time, Colin suddenly braked hard on the shoulder and turned to me looking irritated. "Can't you relax at all?" he asked, putting his hand on my knee. I pulled away and asked him to turn back, said I'd changed my mind about the bar. Colin smirked and said we'd keep it short. I said no. Turn back. His smile faded. He stared through the windshield, jaw working. "You're making this complicated," he said. He eased off the brake and rolled forward on the gravel, slow. I held my phone up like I was about to call someone. He glanced at it, then back at the mirror. "We already passed the last turn," he said. "It's fine." We drove another minute in silence. I unlocked my door, not to jump, just to know I could. He heard the click. "Relax," he said. The road narrowed to a single lane with ditches on both sides. He killed the radio. No lights anywhere, just fence posts flashing past in the beams. I said, "There's no bar out here." He didn't answer. Then he smirked and said we'd already arrived, though there were no buildings around, just an old barn in the distance. I realized I was trapped. I opened the truck door and said I'd get out here and call a taxi. Colin grabbed my wrist, squeezing hard, and hissed, "Don't be stupid, we're having such a good time." I yanked free, jumped down, and started fast walking toward the highway, phone in my hand. He got out too and followed, first coaxing, then warning, "You'll regret this. I know where you live." "No, you don't," I said, not stopping. He tried one more line about just talking in the warm truck. I said no. Colin stopped, yelled an insult, and went back to his truck. I didn't turn around. A door slammed, the engine turned, gravel popped, and he drove off in the opposite direction. I waited a few seconds, then put the flashlight on and walked the shoulder. No cutting fields, no rides, just forward. The map dot crawled. A pickup passed and I stepped off the gravel, ready to ditch if it slowed. It didn't. I tried a taxi number. Call failed. I texted myself the last sign and the mile marker so there was a record. My wrist throbbed where he'd squeezed. I tucked it in my sleeve and kept moving. After nearly an hour, a gas station sign showed. I went in. The clerk looked at my wrist, then at me. I asked to call a taxi and wait inside. He slid over the store phone when mine had no signal. I ordered a ride, bought water, and stood by the counter until headlights turned in. I gave cross streets near my place, not the exact building. I got home after midnight, shaking from cold and fear. I locked the door, checked rooms, and sat on the floor until my breathing eased. The next day, I blocked Colin on every app and deleted the profile. A week later, anonymous texts started. "Watch your back. See you soon." And one that said, "Nice place." My stomach dropped at that one. I walked to campus police with my phone and the gas station receipt. The officer took screenshots, filed an incident report, and asked if I wanted escorts for a few days. I said yes. I changed routes, varied exits, and asked a neighbor to text me if my door looked messed with. After that, the messages stopped. I didn't tell my parents. It felt like admitting I'd put myself in danger, even if I know that isn't fair. I stayed off dating apps for months. I planned daytime errands and shared my location when I did go out. 3 days after the threat stopped, I left town with my department for a weekend conference. I kept replaying the mirror checking and how fast he switched when I said no. About a year later, the local news ran a segment about a man charged with assaulting students he found through dating apps. Colin's photo was in the lineup. Same eyes, just a mugshot now. I called campus police, referenced my report, and they connected me with detectives. I gave testimony, route, barn, gas station, threats, texts, the clerk who saw my wrist. My story became one of 6. I sat outside the courtroom once and heard someone else describe the same questions about roommates. When the sentence came, 15 years, I exhaled. I'm still grateful for the instinct that made me lie about my roommates and get out of that car when there was still time. Looking back, that conference trip wasn't just lucky timing. It probably saved me from becoming another one of his victims who might not have been able to escape. Growing up in the late 80s, me and my friend Ashley used to play at this big city park on the edge of our neighborhood in Texas. We were both 10 years old, and every day after school we'd go to the playground in the far corner of the park where it was less crowded. That was our favorite spot. It had these old swings and an open field where we'd play catch. Our parents let us go alone as long as we were back before dark. One Friday in early summer, we were playing dodgeball on the field when we noticed this man sitting on a bench about 20 meters away. He was wearing a dark jacket even though it was hot outside, and he was just staring in our direction without looking away. At first I didn't pay attention, figured he was waiting for someone. But Ashley whispered that he'd been sitting there for half an hour without moving. I said maybe he was a dad and his kid went to the bathroom. She shook her head and said, "He hasn't looked anywhere but here." I pretended to focus on the ball, but I checked again and she was right. He wasn't shifting around, no fidgeting, just fixed on us in this weird, steady way. I told myself not to be dramatic. We kept our game small, staying near the swings, but every time I turned I caught his eyes. I told Ashley we'd play 2 more rounds and then head home. She made a face like I was being bossy, but she agreed. The sun was still high, but the long stretch of trees behind the field felt different, like you notice it only when you think about who could be standing in there. We kept playing, but we kept looking back at the man. Suddenly he stood up and slowly started walking toward us, still staring. I felt like we should leave and I called to Ashley, but she laughed and said we were being too paranoid. The man came closer and suddenly spoke. His voice was quiet but clear. He asked if we'd seen his dog, a German shepherd that ran away into the park an hour ago. We said we hadn't seen it, and he asked us to help look, suggested checking the bushes by the creek behind the playground. Ashley was already about to agree, but I noticed the man didn't have a leash or collar or anything people usually bring when looking for a dog. I said we had to go home and pulled Ashley's hand. The man stepped closer and repeated his request, more insistent now, adding that it would only take 5 minutes and he'd give us $5 each for helping. He held up his palm like he was about to fish for money, but his hands were empty. I told him our moms didn't let us go to the creek. He said we didn't have to go far, just to call out in the brush, and he pointed past the swings toward the trees. Ashley asked what the dog's name was. He stared a second too long, then said, "Ranger," like he decided on it right there. He added that Ranger liked kids and might come if we called. I said, "We can tell the park office," and I gestured toward the main path where the bulletin board was. He said that wasn't necessary, and that the office was closed, and this is urgent. Ashley looked at me, unsure now. The man looked over his shoulder at the field, no one else was close, and then back at us. 5 minutes, he said again, with the same cold tone he'd been using. My stomach dropped. I instinctively backed away and said loudly, "No, we need to go. My mom is waiting." I grabbed Ashley's hand and walked quickly toward the park exit. Ashley resisted at first, thinking I was overreacting, but when she looked back and saw the man following us, she sped up too. We didn't run at first because I didn't want to trip or make him run. I just wanted people to hear us if we had to yell. He kept the same steady pace, not close enough to touch us, but not letting the distance grow either. Ashley whispered, "Maybe he lives nearby," and I said, "Then he doesn't need us." We were almost to the main path by the picnic tables when he said, from behind us. "Just 5 minutes." I said, "No." Louder. A couple looked over. The man stopped talking but kept walking. We cut across the grass toward the park exit sign. A jogger turned his head. I waved without stopping. My mouth felt dry. We were almost running toward the exit, and the man kept walking behind us, not speeding up, but not falling behind either. I told Ashley, "If he gets closer, scream." She nodded, eyes wet now, like it finally clicked for her the way it had for me. When we ran out onto the street where cars were passing and people were walking, the man stopped at the edge of the park and just stood there watching us. He didn't step onto the sidewalk. He just fixed on us the way he had on the bench, like he was waiting for us to come back. We crossed without waiting for the light because a truck slowed and waved us through. I looked back once more. He was still there, hands in the jacket pockets, standing so still it made my skin crawl. We ran all the way to my house and burst inside, out of breath and scared. My mom didn't understand what happened right away, but when we explained, she immediately called the police. Police arrived 20 minutes later, listened to our description, and said a patrol would check the park. But when they came back an hour later, the man was already gone. The next week, my mom showed me an article from the local newspaper. Police were warning parents about a man who'd been approaching children in city parks, offering to help find lost animals. In 2 cases, kids went with him and only came home several hours later, in shock and not remembering details. The man hadn't been caught, but the paper published his description, and it matched who we'd seen. Me and Ashley never went back to that park, and my mom banned me from going anywhere without an adult for the rest of the summer. The officer who took our statement said we did the right thing, and that the dog story comes up again and again. He asked if we could describe the eyes, the shoes, the voice. I said his voice was flat and careful, and his shoes looked clean like office shoes. Ashley added that he said the dog's name too slow. The officer wrote it all down and gave my mom a pamphlet about safety that looked like homework. That weekend, my mom called Ashley's mom, and they made a schedule so one of them was always with us if we wanted to go anywhere besides our own yards. My dad took me to the park once at noon to show me where the office was and to point out the patrol routes. He said, "If someone wants you alone, that's your answer." And he looked more tired than angry. I kept thinking about how normal the man tried to sound, and how the jacket made no sense in that heat. At school the following Monday, our teacher held up that newspaper and said the district had asked them to talk to us. She told us never to help look for pets with a stranger, never to get close to a car for directions, and to walk toward other adults if something felt wrong. A boy asked what if the pet really is missing. She said to tell an adult and let them handle it. There was a silence that made me feel like we were all picturing the same bench. At recess, I noticed how many grown men stood alone by the fence watching their kids play, and how some didn't. I wasn't scared of every face. I was just done with giving the benefit of the doubt when my gut said no. When I said we should leave, she left. Her dad switched his work break so he could walk us home twice weekly. By July, the paper ran another warning, and the description still sounded like him. Years later, I think about what could have happened if I'd listened to the man and gone to look for a non-existent dog in the bushes. Me and Ashley sometimes discuss that encounter, and Ashley thanks me every time for insisting we leave, for not giving in to his persuasion. I learned that day that sometimes your gut feeling is more important than being polite, and that predators often use kindness and reasonable requests to lure victims. I never found out if police eventually caught that man, or how many other kids he approached before or after us. But I'm grateful I noticed the missing leash, and that Ashley trusted me enough to run when I said we needed to go. Even though she thought I was overreacting at first, I still teach my kids that rule.